Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of NOVAcast. We're starting a new podcast here at Nova, designed to get our message out a little more, talk to people that are in our industry, see what's going on, and what better first guest than our own Steve Laudwig, our technical sales manager, a wealth of knowledge. Knows more about bagging than I know about baseball, and I think that's saying something. So, Steve, thanks for being the guinea pig here and joining the first podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, sure thing. So, what we'll get into today, since you're the bagging guy, that's I always like to call you the bagging Yoda. I think we could start with kind of a brief overview of where we're at. Where bagging's at as an industry as a whole, equipment wise, and how it's evolved over your career. Where you see it going in the future. Then we can get into, how companies should be approaching purchasing that bagging equipment now as opposed to, several years ago, and how that's changed overall. And, some of those important considerations when going through and actually purchasing that equipment. And then I think we could wrap up too with a little bit of our process on the bagging side. What it's like for a prospect or a customer to work with us and to, have our equipment installed and how it works for them over the years. And then obviously I'm sure we'll take on a few tangents, but we'll try and keep it around 30 minutes. So it'll probably be somewhere between 30 minutes and 3 hours would be my guess. We're not on a time crunch here, like live TV, but I think we'll be in good shape here. We'll try to make it useful for everyone out there.
So. Well, if people can stay awake for even 30 minutes listening to the two of us, we will have accomplished something. So we'll consider that a victory.
Exactly. It's probably some of the reps we work with, driving around their territories, and they're like, you know what, rather than just call Josh or Steve, maybe I can just listen to them both talk at once, right? So we can kill two birds with one stone for them. So
Absolutely.
But yeah, let's dive in. So give our listeners here, our viewers, all the many thousands that will be consuming this, kind of an overview of your role at Nova, how the bagging industry, where you've been over the last several years, and kind of just a career overview.
Well, my role here at Nova, as you mentioned earlier, is technical sales manager, and really what that involves is just helping to identify the scope of an application once a customer or a sales rep or a third-party integrator comes to us and says, hey, I've got this application and here's what I think they want to do. Then my job is to kind of help correctly identify that and channel that information to the correct resources within Nova, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, production and purchasing, so that we can begin to put together the basics of a system, develop the drawings, and ultimately put together a bid for them. And that part of it today, I think, works basically like it did 40 years ago, right? What is different is the same, but machine design, obviously, controls, pneumatics, mechanics, all that sort of thing have changed dramatically from this time 40 years ago. When I started in this industry, Allen Bradley had just come out with PLCs, and I think Modicon had one, but the Allen Bradley Slick 100, and if there's, any other ancient guys or gals listening to this podcast, I think it was either 16 in and 16 out or 32 in and 32 out, but it wasn't much, but we thought literally we were launching rockets to the moon. It was, a big change from the, relay logic or pneumatic logic that was used at the time. Obviously today, we're light years ahead of that with the control systems that we're installing. Wiring schemes run from, have gone from hundreds and hundreds of wires and terminations to Modbus and CAN bus and similar protocols. So we have intelligent wiring systems, and to think maybe more specifically to some of the differences. In the 1980s, you have to remember we were really making some of those first inroads in changing over packaging operations from manually operated systems to automatic systems. So in most cases, a lot of the justification for putting in these automated lines was speed, because we're going from 8 to 10 bags a minute to 16 to 20 bags per minute. And so we're going to increase production. Maybe we're going to, move from 5 to 6 guys on a manual line to maybe 2 guys on an automated line. So there was some staffing issues. But today we know we can achieve speed, right? We know that automation can help us achieve speed. So efficiency of the operation really kind of has become the key focus today. How many minutes of runtime versus the available time is that machine operable? And I think that's the reliability and the efficiency aspect of it today plays a huge part. And it's interesting that when we talk about that, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about it later when we get into the efficiency of the operation, but it's really, it's a tortoise and a hare, right? And it's about how long you can run, how efficiently you can run, with what manpower you can run it with. And lastly, the service interface today is different than it was 40 years ago. You have to remember, and it's hard for a couple of generations that might be listening to this time 40 years ago, we didn't have cell phones. So if there was a problem in the plant, they walked up to a production office or somewhere where there was a landline. They made a call. They called somebody, hopefully got a service tech on the phone, explained the problem. The service tech would say, what about this or what about that, or have you checked this? And it was literally back and forth sometimes for hours in order to accomplish that. And so as time went on, having service personnel close to customers, remotely located service personnel, made a huge difference. And today, of course, and I know you said we're going to talk about service later, but today we've overcome all of that because, again, it's not about how many days you're down, it's about how many minutes you're down. And so, again, efficiency is a big part of it. As to the future, your guess is as good as mine. Obviously, efficiency and simplicity of operation is going to continue to be a focus. We know that everyone has staffing issues with operators and maintenance people. AI in some form or fashion is probably going to play a huge part in that. Even today, a lot of our controls, I call it the Wizard of Oz effect, right? To the guy operating it, it's the great and powerful Oz, and he pushes a couple of buttons. But behind the scenes, there's somebody madly pulling levers inside that control system, so to speak, so that to the operator, it's very easy, very efficient, it's very trainable. But we've taken a lot of the precise knowledge base out of the front end of the controls and put it into the back end. So who knows what the future looks like, but what we've even accomplished in the last 10 years and what that sets us up for in the next 10 or 20, it's mind-boggling. But you're going to continue to see increases in efficiency, serviceability, and obviously operability, I think.
Sure. Yeah, and I think operability is a big one. You mentioned that, there's so much work that goes on in the back end, and we have great controls engineers on our team. And our stuff is great and easy to use. And I think that's one of the things when you think about the future, that's probably where a lot of the focus is going to be about, anyone who can use a smartphone can, program a machine, right? Or not program the machine, but, at least get it running, right? I think that's where a lot of things on both the bagging side and the case side, automation in general are probably going. But
yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So when switching gears to, and like you said, we will talk about service later. We've got a great product, NOVAsite, that you do such a great job of explaining the benefits of that. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about how a company should approach, purchasing automated equipment, in the year 2023, 2024 versus maybe the way they did it in 1980, right? Or, I know the days of going to a trade show and, cutting POs right on the floor and, all those are gone. But, I think a lot of it has to do with consuming content along the way and, becoming a trusted advisor for some of these some of these customers, and then they come back over and over again because you're educating them. But what is something that you think, or, you know, a few things at least, what you think companies need to consider today when purchasing equipment that maybe they didn't have to consider, you know, years ago?
Well, you know, to start with, I don't know if I should give anybody necessarily advice on what they should or shouldn't do, because it's not my money, it's not my capital. I've never run a production facility, but I can tell you what I see in the industry, and particularly with folks that do this full time for a living and have been very successful at it, and kind of what those folks seem to be analyzing. And again, I think I mentioned it, you know, previously, but you know, things have changed dramatically in the industry, in that we were really focused on a change from manual operation to automatic operation. So speed. So it was bags per minute. And I think as we've now obviously been able to accomplish that, now we're talking about uptime efficiency, right? Because bags per minute, an instantaneous rate, doesn't really tell you how many pallets you're going to have out the door at the end of a shift or the end of a day or production run, whatever it happens to be. So I think a lot of people understand it's almost a tortoise and a hare scenario, right? You know, and I did this recently for somebody at 16 bags a minute at 95% efficiency for 20 hours. You produce more than you do if you run 20 bags a minute at 75% efficiency. So if you're asking what somebody should look at when they're thinking about an application or looking at proposals, this bags per minute, it's not that it's insignificant, but it needs to be factored in with everything else. Because if one company says 16 bags per minute, another company says 20, and you instantly say, hey, all things considered, the money's the same, 20 bags per minute, you have to factor in the fact that it's about uptime efficiency, right? And I always tell people it's a trap, and obviously people that run these production facilities know it. But the other thing they want, I think, then when you start talking about, hey, we're going to run at whatever rate, but we're going to run at this efficiency, you know, so I always tell people, don't get caught up in the bags per minute trap. And obviously production guys, they know this, right? But they also want tangibles. Tell us how you're going to do it. How are you going to run more efficient than the other guy? And don't give me a load, with all due respect to car salesmen. Don't give me some car sales tactic about our service department's great, you know, our product's reliable, etc. But how are you going to address, you know, the operations of this system, and how are you going to achieve this efficiency? And a quick story, you know, a while back, we were invited by a major corporation to make a presentation about a system. And we found out within a few days of making the presentation that we were going to have two competitors there, and we were going to do this jointly, same room. So competitor one, competitor two, competitor three, they each make their pitch in front of each other. And then the 30 or so people in attendance are going to ask questions, right? So you don't always like to do that, particularly if there's proprietary stuff involved, but we did, and it was really an interesting concept. And at the end, it's a question and answer session, and a question is asked, and then each of the vendors provides an answer. And one of the questions asked by somebody who was the head of maintenance said, hey, tell us about what happens to your system, and when it does happen, how do you address it? What do we need to be aware of? What kind of training is involved, etc. So we take turn answering it. We get to the third presenter, and who will remain unnamed. A very nice young man, had dinner with him afterwards. Great guy. But he pondered the question for 10 or 15 seconds, and you can tell he's thinking deeply. And he said, well, you know, our stuff just doesn't break down. And of course, the room erupted into laughter, which lightened the mood for the rest of us. It was very unfortunate for him. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of moving parts here, right? No pun intended. So how are we going to run that? How are we going to keep that system running and achieve the efficiencies that we need to achieve so that you get the maximum throughput from your facilities, from your people, from all this non-productive overhead that's this front office staff. And so I know we're going to talk more about that later, but I think that, the other thing people consider are human resources required, because everybody struggles finding qualified operators and maintenance techs. If you don't, you should probably just start a business and start helping other people find them. So, they want to know how many employees do I need? What level of skill do they need coming into it? And how are you going to support them? And that's huge. Another thing that's overused or misused a lot in this industry, and you'll see it on websites and advertisements and probably podcasts for all I know, is the word solution, right? Everybody wants to say solution because I guess it sounds good. I'm not sure. But the fact of the matter is, if you're really providing a solution, that then involves the fact that you as the buyer may take physical possession of this system, but whoever the vendor is going to be your teammate for the next 10, 20, maybe even 30 years. We just replaced a 30-year-old system recently. So you have to remember that. So as you're looking at all of this is, who's my partner? And are they here to sell machinery? Or are they really here to be a solutions provider? And frankly, there's money in it for the buyer as well as the vendor in being a total solutions company, but you have to be committed to that, not just building machinery. And then they want real answers. As I said, they want to know that there's a tangible program behind all of the things you're saying, so that it's not people, it's process, right? And I think that's the thing. Obviously, systems that I sell today, I'm not going to be around when those systems are still operating. So they want to know that there's a company and a process behind it. And so I think, again, I can't tell people what to look for, but I can tell them what we at Nova are trying to put together as a company, as a team, so that we can provide tangible solutions to people down the road.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a good natural segue into, you touched on a few things, right? You touched on, benefits of what we're trying to do overall, like with NOVAsite, things that we keep in mind when we're presenting, our solutions, so to speak, to these companies, right? With total cost of ownership, things like that. So why don't we touch a little bit on total cost of ownership? Because one of the things that I think, at least I hear on the case side in my sales conversations are, well, what makes your white robots better than your yellow robots versus your blue robots, all those different things. And I think you give a great answer on this. I've heard you, kind of tell it many times about, at the top, they're all pretty similar, right? But it all comes down to, what are you doing proactively and who is your partner in this to ensure uptime?
Right. And so, I think, total cost of ownership it's a subject that, again, it requires some meat on the bone, right? It requires some tangible data behind it, because it's kind of interesting. I got an email recently from somebody who's allied in the industry, and they said, buy our product X and it'll save you X amount of money over the next 5 years. So I clicked through. I'm curious, right? So I clicked through, and it says pick the machine, and they had a dozen different models there. So I picked the model, and it said over the next 10 years, this machine is going to cost you $30,000, and our competitor machine is going to cost you, and I'm making the number up because I don't remember, but it was a huge difference, $150,000. Yeah. That was the answer. And it was kind of like me in high school freshman math. I copied off the girl next to me, so I didn't show my work because there was no work. There was only an answer, right? And so I think that, we have to be careful of that. And again, when we talk about total cost of ownership, I think it's, again, about presenting people with tangibles, because the largest, and this I'm really passionate about. And so if you haven't gone to sleep at this point, at least consider this. your greatest cost of ownership with any system, I don't care if it's $30,000 or $3 million, is downtime. And everything, and so there's the answer, right? There's the answer I just talked about. The answer is downtime. Well, what's the worth behind it? What's the math behind it? And obviously, that's about training. It's about operability of the system. It's about parts cost and parts availability. And it's about service and service availability. And it's really interesting as you look at this. And you know, we have some TCO analytics that we use when folks are looking at systems, and I hope it's a little more in depth than the example I just talked about. But here's one I did recently, and this particular application, this customer was producing approximately 600 pounds per minute of a given product, and that product generated for them roughly 70 cents per pound of revenue. So at 95% efficiency, they were producing roughly $23,000 per hour of gross revenue, give or take. Now they run about 6,500 hours a year, depending on the demand for the product and shutdowns, plant-wide shutdowns, et cetera. So they basically run 48 weeks out of the year. So they're generating $23,000 per hour in gross revenue. If we help them through our parts program, through our service programs, through our training, through advanced controls, if we can show them tangible, not just, hey, we do this better than everybody else, but if we can show them where we can reduce their downtime by just 2 hours per week, just 2 hours per week, we will net them over $200,000 per year, assuming, and we don't know what their profit margins is, but let's just take 10%, give or take, over $200,000 per year to the bottom line, just on that one process line alone, and $2 million a year in total revenue. So when you talk about cost of ownership, that initial capital purchase, and I'm not saying it's not important and that you can charge anything you want for a system. We understand the competitive nature of this business, but you really have to think about uptime. And, you know, so when we talk about total cost of ownership, would you like, I mean, do you want to dig into some of the details now? Because So,
yep.
for example, we talked about, you know, what's evolved in this industry since 40 years ago when I got involved, where there weren't even cell phones. And, you know, now, of course, we have, you know, obviously remote access to control systems that most people offer. Some people have gone to cameras. We offer a product called NOVAsite. And NOVAsite, you can go to our website. I won't bore you with the details. I'm probably not smart enough to explain them all. But it's basically a Wi-Fi headset, which is in a charging station on the machine. And I'm going to give you the mile high view here. And again, details are available. But you have a problem, whether it's an operational problem, whether it's a maintenance problem, somebody goes and sticks the headset on. They call Nova. A tech answers. We are now seeing what you're seeing through this headset, which, by the way, is OSHA approved. It works with all of the safety devices that you would have in your plant. We now see what you're seeing in your peripheral. You're seeing who you're talking to. And we're also remoted in, providing you give us access. We're remoted into your control system. So now we're seeing what is going on in the controls. We're mechanically and physically seeing what's going on. If need be, in your other peripheral, we can throw up a drawing, for example, so that you can you see a wiring diagram, if that's pertinent, instructions, whatever it happens to be. And now what used to happen is, you know, you would have a problem, operations would call in maintenance would maybe struggle with it an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. They'd make a phone call. The service tech on the other end would say, try this, try that. Have you checked this? Have you checked that? What's going on here? And we're hours into this. And remember how much every hour we're generating, in the example I gave you, $23,000 of gross revenue. We're hours into this. We may be $100,000 as far as the company is concerned into it. Now with NOVAsite, you go over, you put on this headset, you start this process, and now instead of hours and hours, it's maybe minutes or an hour, and you're back up and running. So the old scenario I talked about having service people in the region so that they can get there in a day or two, you're 20 to 40 hours of operation down by the time our guy gets there. And in this case, you're now instantly available. And the other thing is, this process helps further educate your operators and your maintenance staff. So the next time it happens, because they were hands-on and not just a service tech coming in there and fixing it and saying you're good to go, now they're more capable. And it's a great learning tool. It's a great training tool. And the bottom line is it just adds to your revenue. But now, let's just say, Josh, that we've identified the fact that you need a part. There's a part failure. It's moving parts. Remember, unlike the guy that I talked about that their machinery didn't break down, it's moving parts. You've got belts and chains and gearboxes and cylinders and drives, whatever. So part stock, yeah, we're like everybody else. So here's the car sales, the intangible. Yeah, we keep lots of parts in stock, etc. Great. But what's that mean to me? Do you have the one I need? One of the things we do in our bill of materials is give you the OEM part number. We give you our part number, we give you the OEM part number, we give you the description. We want to sell you parts. There's money in parts. It's a profit center for Nova. But we also don't want to handcuff you and prevent you from operating your machine if we don't have the part or we can't get it to you quickly. So in this case, if it's a Nord gearbox or a Bimba cylinder, you can go out and you can source that from your local supply house if it's available. Maybe you have it in your own stock, the commonly available stuff, and you're back up and running. And then finally, I did mention, parts as a profit center. And, I don't think anybody expects anybody not to make money running a business. But we do have the opportunity for you to price check us on parts. And one of the scenarios we came up with, there's a particular Bimba pancake cylinder, little pancake cylinder, short throw cylinder. Hundreds, if not thousands, are used every year in bagging applications. They're for bag clamps and positioning devices, very common part. That cylinder today costs somewhere between $40 and $50, depending on how you're buying it. Cost to an OEM such as Nova. We sell that particular Bimba cylinder for around $150. And there might be some people out there that think that's a hideous markup. Maybe other people recognize it as being fair. But we ran a price check against a competitor who is, again, of the 3 or 4 major competitors in most of our bagging industries, they're one of them, $365. And again, that's when you talk about Nova, because we aren't owned by an investment group, because there wasn't a leveraged buyout, because we're privately held, we're able to do some of these things, still run a profitable business, but ensure that our customers are best served and have the opportunity to keep that machine running at its maximum efficiency. And those are some of the tangible things. So, instead of just saying, we're good, trust us, we're saying, here's how we're going to address it.
Yep. And I'd be interested to know, too, how that's changed over the years, right? Buying bagging equipment maybe when you were first in the industry or, even years ago, now I feel like, us as sales guys, we're armed with more data than we've ever been, but also so are the end customers, right? So, one of the things that I always, kind of think is people who come to us and they say, oh, I need a horizontal form fill seal machine, or I need a robotic palletizer. These people know what those are. They have a rough idea of, probably what it should cost, right? They've probably seen it in the field before. it's not like they're, thumbing through a catalog saying, oh, I'm trying to do this. What do I need? Right. So how have you changed your approach to selling? And I always like to say helping, right? You're not always selling. It's a lot of helping in there. How have you kind of seen your approach, and then also the approach of, others in the industry change over the years, right? Maybe you've changed certain things that, others haven't yet, and it's been beneficial to you.
Well, I think, I don't know if this ever changes. I think the key when you're trying to help somebody identify, and again, I watch this word carefully, best solution to their application, is to really listen, right? Because we have to remember, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, we are not here selling machinery. We are here selling profitability, right? We make machinery. That's what we do with our time, is we make machinery. But it's really to provide a solution to somebody. And I see so many people in sales, instead of really listening and helping the customer identify, this is what I need to produce. This is the area I need to produce it in, with the people I need to produce it with. And then sometimes we can't always accommodate this, but with the budget that I have to do it with. But instead of doing that, I think people like to sell nuts and bolts. And because we are in an engineering intense industry, people like to sell nuts and bolts. And this is a 1/4 inch thicker, or this has a duty cycle that's 25% greater, whatever it happens to be. And I've always told people, nobody in this industry buys anything because it's sleek or pretty or sexy or whatever it happens to be, right? They buy it because it's going to make them money. And so we're talking about a machine that's going to achieve what they need to achieve with the product and the processes and the people they have. And that's going to make them money. And with that money, then if they want to go buy a boat or a motorcycle or some other sleek, sexy thing, that's great. But we're really here selling solutions. And the only reason I don't like that word is sometimes there's no meat behind it. And that's what I really, I hope, we can sincerely get across to people, is when you look at who you want to be your partner, make sure there's some meat on the bone. And understand that these are mutually profitable relationships, right? So, anybody that offers, free service for the life of your machine, whatever it happens to be, you're going to get what you pay for. I think people are intelligent enough to understand how business works. And, if you spend, whether you spend $100,000 on a machine or a couple of million on a system, there's a limited amount of profitability for that manufacturer, but it really shouldn't matter, because what we're here to do is to make sure that that machine is running, and it runs like that for its entire usable life, and that your people are supported, your machinery is supported. And again, it's all about money at the bottom line. So I always I really try, I think, to impress upon people, let's really identify what you're trying to accomplish, and what you're trying to accomplish it with. And then we'll come up with a solution, instead of trying to take whatever machine or system that you might have, or we might have, and trying to force it into that application.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. We've got a lot of great nuggets here, Steve. I think, before we wrap up, you've been selling machinery for decades, specifically, Nova machinery, right? So for a lot of it, give us, if you have one off the top of your head, and I hate to put you on the spot, but, maybe an example or two of a customer that you've worked with since, let's say the 90s or the early 2000s that still has equipment running. I know we just mentioned we replaced, some 30-year-old equipment, just to speak a little bit to the, the overall quality of our stuff, as well as the, kind of that investment that, someone made decades ago that continues to pay off for them.
And I think, and it's not putting me on the spot, because I can think of a number, but I think it's kind of a two-part question, right? One part is the durability of the system, the reliability. We've talked about that throughout this podcast. So it's the durability and the reliability. But the fact of the matter is, these machines are not always running in the best of environments. Maintenance staff, the turnover, and not with everyone. So I don't want to just categorize this in general, but maintenance staff sometimes doesn't have the longevity that it used to. So people are coming and going. That's just kind of a sign of the times, right? So these machines, no matter how durable and how reliable they are, they have to be maintained and serviced and supported. And that's really the key. And again, I don't want to harp on that too much, but that's where your partner is really super important. We have automated filling and palletizing lines running in mining operations. A pretty tough environment. It's dirty, it's dusty, it's hot, it's cold. A lot of times, too many people have too big of hammers. And it's the ability, I think, to consistently be able to provide that back end support for people long term. We have, Nova, started initially as a conventional palletizing company, and we have some of our very first conventional palletizers that we've completely rebuilt the top end with new mechanics, new electronics, but those mainframes and basic operating systems that were there from the very beginning are there today. And it's that commitment to do that because, we live in a throwaway society, and, a lot of times I think, people basically run the wheels off of the car, so to speak, and then they go buy another car and say, well, that one was a piece of crap. Hopefully this one's better. We certainly want to put a good product out, but again, it's going to be used. It's going to be in some cases abused. And I think it's that support. So I think as I look at a lot of Nova customers that have a lot of systems, I looked at a form and fill system several years ago, and I know it's still running today, and I don't know the bag count on it, but it had 27 million bags on it when I saw it. And I know it's working today because a customer went in, less than 6 months or so ago to watch it run as a reference site. So it's just, and again, that machine doesn't have a lot of the original parts on it. So anybody who says their stuff doesn't break down, amen, hallelujah, wish I was you. But again, I think it's that commitment to make sure that we don't put you in a position of use it broke or get a new one. We're going to support that until there's nothing left to support.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, you mentioned a lot of good nuggets there, and it's always great to be able to know that you sold something years ago that's still running. I mean, 27 million bags. I'm just thinking back to your total cost of ownership nuggets, whatever that rate is that they're getting a profit per hour, it's probably nice to multiply that by 27 million, right?
Yeah. And again, remember I told you I cheated in 9th grade math, so I can't do it, but yeah, it'd be pretty impressive.
That's why we're in sales, right? Yeah.
That's what my teacher told me.
And the one other thing too, in terms of longevity, we talk about Nova Systems has been out there for a long time. Like I'm the first line of defense a lot of times when somebody calls us, for not necessarily a service related issue, because we have a separate dedicated line for that. Right. But one of the tricks that, people do is they're like, oh, I'll hit the sales line because I know somebody will answer. Right. So, I answer a fair number of service or parts calls, and I always, think it's cool when someone calls in and they said, oh, I have this, Zygot machine. It had this phone number on it. Are you guys Zygot? And, that was our name a long time ago when Voight, who's still with us as our director of engineering, when he and his co-founders founded the company. I mean, so to still get calls on those conventional palletizers from, the early 90s is kind of a testament, I think, to the overall quality of the machinery and, the love and engineering that went into these machinery or, these pieces of machinery, for decades. Right. So I think
Right.
that's always pretty cool.
And, here's another thing, and this is maybe not a tangible, right? So you have to weigh this, but I think what we just talked about and what you just mentioned, maybe backs that statement up a bit, but some of this is experience, right? And, we have several people with 40 plus years experience. Isn't always an indicator that you're good, but it's a pretty good indicator if you've stuck around for 40 years that you know a little bit of something about what you're doing. We have a lot of people with 20 plus years, and again, kind of like the little application things you see on people's website where you punch in the product and the bag type and the rate you need, and they spit out the perfect system for you. And I realize these are just to give people, a starting point perhaps, but at some point, real people with real experience have to then review everything that all your analytics tell you, and then assure somebody that that's right. Or if it's not, maybe direct them, to a different approach. And so I think experience is key. And that's where you have the ability to come in and adapt a 20, 30-year-old machine with different controls or different drives. I've been in a position where I've called a company and said, hey, I've looked at this machine. Here's the serial number, whatever. And nobody there has ever seen one. Nobody knows when it was built. They can't locate the drawings and it's frustrating because the machine basically just needs some TLC and a new coat of paint, so to speak, and it'll run another 20 years. And so, that's not always the case. Applications change. Sometimes, you can't necessarily, as the saying goes, take a sow's ear and make a silk purse out of it. But at some point, you've got to say, hey, it's time to punt. Let's upgrade this to a new system. But, in a lot of cases, again, it's just this experience and capability to support this equipment that really makes a huge difference. And again, I want to sell tangibles because I don't want to be that used car salesman, but I think it's just really, really important that you weigh all of those facts, including the experience as you're looking for a partner.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think these are some great tips for, people looking to purchase some automated bagging equipment, whether it be the first time or they're looking to, kind of upgrade what they've got. This has been super helpful. And, this is, we talked a lot about the technical side of the bagging and sales. And, with this being the first podcast, I think a cool way to kind of end these will be, a non-related question, right? So I think we both travel, from time to time. And, it's not always Las Vegas or Chicago. It's often an industrial park in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, or, places like that. But I don't know about you. Whenever I'm out on the road, I like to try and eat at a place that I can't get here in, where I'm at. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I would be interested to know, in all your years of travel, are there any meals that stick out to you that you've gotten on the road that just, slapped you right in the face? They were so good.
I've been so blessed in so many ways, but being a foodie, if you travel, and I've traveled, almost all of North America and a lot of the rest of the world. So I've eaten some great food. I've had wonderful meals in Italy where I've been invited to sit down at the owner's table and they open wine that doesn't even have a label on it that is just unbelievable. I've had, barbecue. I'm a big barbecue guy. And of course, as you know, barbecue around the country is different. I've had barbecue everywhere. I've been taken to the fish markets in Louisiana where they basically shuck the oysters right in front of you. So I've really been blessed. I couldn't put my finger on one meal in particular, but just gosh, maybe you got a little bit of a flavor, no pun intended, but I have just, I have been able to eat and drink and, commune with people that, gosh, I never would have had I not just literally almost fallen into this industry. I would have never had that opportunity. Yep. So as a foodie, people may think that, industrial automation isn't a terribly sexy business, but I'm telling you, the food is wonderful.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. I say the same thing. There's this country song out there that's like, I've seen a lot of places I thought I'd never see, right? And I always think back to, I worked in baseball before this industry. I worked in, I've always been kind of traveling, and it's pretty cool that I consider ourselves lucky that we get to kind of travel, as much as we do. And definitely have had some good food and some good drinks along the way for sure. So, well, thanks for joining me on the first episode here, Steve. We'll see if there's a second episode. We'll see if the pilot gets picked up. It took a while for Seinfeld to get picked up, right? I think I was reading somewhere that Jerry Seinfeld had the idea for Seinfeld, 10 years before they started it, and look how that turned out.
Well, once this is published and goes live, maybe you should ask anyone who's made it through the entire podcast to leave a comment, just so we know somebody stayed awake.
Yeah, exactly. We can you could throw a food quiz in there, right? Then they have to listen to the very end. Where did Steve see an oyster shucked right in front of his face? And if they can answer that question, then we should send them a Nova t-shirt or something. So.
Absolutely. And a gift certificate maybe where they can go have some of their own.
Yeah. Sounds good, Steve. Well, always good to talk to you. And thanks again for joining me here. That is episode 1 of the NOVAcast. We will see you next time.